Joining us now, we have staff writer for The Atlantic and MSNBC political contributor Mark Leibovich, New York Times opinion columnist David French, senior writer at The Dispatch and MSNBC contributor David Drucker, and staff writer for The New Yorker, Susan Glasser. Welcome to all of you. David French, to you first. Has the GOP migration begun, as former Senator Jeff Flake is claiming? I mean, how accurate is his assessment?
I'm going to say it's possibly accurate, but it's premature. I do think there are signs of division within the MAGA coalition, without question. And it's not just political division in the sense of our congressmen and senators and members of the House willing to break with the president. You're seeing some divisions around things like the Epstein files. You've seen division within the right over Tucker Carlson, for example. So fault lines are forming. The cracks are definitely showing. But the reality is Trump is still the absolute monarch of the Republican Party. And I don't think the off-year elections really change that, because I think he still can absolutely end almost any Republican presidential or any Republican political career that he wants to end. And I think you'll see the migration happen the moment that members of Congress understand or believe that Trump actually isn't in control of their fate any longer. Until that moment happens, we might see a little bit of breakage here and there and on the edges, but the ship of GOP state is going to keep sailing under Trump until Trump is not the one who decides their future.
David Drucker, I want to play what Texas Republican Chip Roy had to say. This was on Steve Bannon's podcast. Take a listen.
We've got to start getting serious about this. In this election, let's be very clear. This is a wake-up call that if you don't lead and lead with a clear vision and a clear direction, you're going to get absolutely slaughtered. Lead with something people can sink their teeth into. People are tired of not being able to afford housing. They're tired of not being able to afford groceries.
Let's throw in health care. And what about what we just heard from Senator Schumer and Senator Peters backing him up about 30 minutes ago when they said, look, what we're going to offer is a one-year extension. That's all. We're trying to buy time. We're going to back off from trying to fix the ACA subsidies and lock them in permanently so that we can have a bipartisan negotiation. What's the reaction that going to be like within the Republican Party? What should it be?
Well, look, I think it was tactically smart on the part of Minority Leader Schumer to make the first move and show Republicans and really show voters, because that's who the target audience here is, that they're interested in reopening the government and they're willing to compromise. And however Republicans want to couch the compromise as a non-compromise, as, a lot of smoke and mirrors, it doesn't matter. I think what a lot of voters are going to hear is these guys are willing to move off their maximal position to do something that I want them to do anyway. So that was a very smart move. I think Republicans are in a position coming out of this election where they have to get themselves back to a place that they were heading into the 2024 election, which was focused intently on voters' number one issue, and that was inflation. Right? Every poll we see shows that voters have a number of priorities, but that their number one priority, the one that's squeezing them the most, is the cost of living across the board, right? And that's why so many of these candidates were talking about affordability. And when you look at the polling, it's not just that people are unhappy with the president's performance on the economy, and of course presidents get more blame and credit than they deserve. It's that they don't feel he's been focused enough on it. And there are two things that you do not want to do in politics, but one in particular, because you may be trying to fix the economy and fail, but if voters think that you are not sufficiently focused on it, then you're in a world of hurt politically. And the polling that we saw in October leading into Tuesday's election was not just that people were unhappy with the economy and the president's stewardship of the economy, and that's a problem in and of itself. They felt that the president was focused on other things. One last thing I'll mention here. I think in retrospect, it has to be said that Speaker Johnson's decision to keep House Republicans, to keep the House out of session for the last month plus has backfired, because what American people see, forget the American people, what voters in these targeted races see is that the majority party in Congress, in one of the chambers of Congress, is not showing up for work. And that visual, I think, has to be looked at now as a mistake, even if Republicans want to say that they did their job by passing a government funding bill before the government shut down, which they did.
Mark, I want to read a little bit more from former Arizona Senator Jeff Flake, who wrote in the Washington Post, Republicans running in midterm races are going to face a choice. They can cling, as many Democrats did in 2024, to an economic message that ignores reality, or they can begin the slow, necessary work of reclaiming the party of free markets and global engagement. Republicans most likely to lead this migration are those senators not on the ballot in 2026. So, Mark, one could argue that more Republicans were speaking out against Trump after January 6th than they were today. But your assessment of where Republicans are now, just a year out from the midterms, how do you see it?
Well, first of all, I mean, I do think that there's a fundamental difference between the Republican sort of migration away from Trump after January 6th and the beginnings that we may or may not be seeing now, which is that Donald Trump was, in fact, he was not a lame duck in 2021. I mean, it looked like he had no shot of ever coming back to the White House. Lo and behold, he did. But he asserted his own viability and his own potency basically 6 months later when he said that, look, I'll probably run again. And it's, you know, all of a sudden he was the front runner almost from the beginning. And so like that itself was the definition of power. And obviously everyone had to respect that. Today, he is a lame duck. Now, lame duck is a word that I'm sure he hates and has been trying to like postpone for as much as possible. The fact is he's more of a lame duck today, much more of a lame duck today than he was a week ago. And he was able really in the first year of his term to kind of cruise on the momentum he had. And I think the lingering and still very real fear that a lot of people, certainly in Congress, the Republicans in Congress have of him and of his voters. But that dissipates by the day, not just because of the economic numbers, but just because of time. And look, he's providing a lot of fodder for people who think he is checking out, whether it's the pictures of the ballroom or the destruction of the East Wing or, you know, the Great Gatsby thing and any number of things that he's doing that looks like he's not focused on what his job should be right now.
And let's keep in mind the Supreme Court's going to weigh in on the legality of his tariffs. So that's a huge component as well. Susan, I'm saving the best for last here because in your New Yorker piece titled America Begins Clapping Back at Donald Trump, you write about the elections, but also the death of Dick Cheney and retirement of Nancy Pelosi. And in that context, you say the clock is ticking for Trump. The president himself knows it. He blamed Tuesday's losses on the fact that he was not on the ballot to rally Republicans, but he did not mention a larger constitutional truth about his lame duck status that neither he nor his party seems to have begun reckoning with. He won't be on the ballot heading the ticket ever again. So why should a post-Trump election worry Republicans?
Well, I think, Donald Trump prescribes himself as the cure to all that ails both his party and America, right? And so if you have one of our two political parties that has been sort of reorganized over the last decade to be a party that supports and is about the promotion of a single person, and that person is going to exit the scene, then what is your party going to be about? Very striking, for example, to listen to you quote from Jeff Flake, the former senator's op-ed there. He says, well, we've got to get the Republican Party to return to free markets and things like that. Not the Donald Trump Republican Party. Donald Trump, regardless of how the Supreme Court rules on his tariffs, and that oral arguments this week certainly suggested they're not leaning toward adopting the administration's view of his authorities under a particular law. But there are other ways for Donald Trump to oppose tariffs. He's not going to go back to a free market status, and the Republican Party is his Republican Party. So then we come back to this very important point of, as long as he has the power to decide which Republicans can win a primary, which Republicans can lose a primary, then he retains control over these people. The remarkable thing for this historically unpopular president is not that there's a little bleat of difference here and there, but how united they've been, given, in fact, A, how unpopular Donald Trump is with the general public, B, how unpopular many of his policies are. It's not just that he personally is seen as divisive, as was the case in his first term, but now on issues like the economy and even in some surveys on immigration, things that were the strengths of Donald Trump that got him reelected in 2024, even now those policies of Trump's are polling very, very poorly. And yet you see very few Republicans breaking with him. It's interesting to hear Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's kind of out MAGA-ing, the head of MAGA right now by talking about these populist themes that Donald Trump, he seems heedless and indifferent to political consequence. And maybe that's because he isn't going to run anymore.
You bring up Marjorie Taylor Greene. Let me just pose this question to you, David French. How genuine is her criticism, or do you think there's some ulterior motive that's driving her? I mean, what is she doing?
Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene is a very ambitious politician, and she's not term limited. She is not in the Trump position where this is the last rodeo for Trump. There's a big future for her, she hopes and thinks. And so what you're going to see are more people doing what she's doing, where they're going to stake out a particular kind of ground that might be distinct without formally divorcing themselves from Donald Trump. She's not doing that, but she is staking out some distinct ground. She's a very ambitious politician. This isn't hard to figure out. There's going to be a different Republican standard bearer in 2028. As crazy as this sounds, I think she might sometimes have some designs on the Oval Office. And so she's got to forge some sort of identity beyond just Trump sycophant, perhaps. And so I think it's not going to be hard to figure out the motivations as we see these next 3 years unfold. You're going to see an awful lot of people with their own ambitions emerging and without necessarily distancing themselves from Donald Trump. And that's going to be a delicate dance.